Hi, I'm Tessa, a veteran educator working in the field of special education.
And I'm Kim, mom of 2 autistic boys and a late diagnosed autistic person myself.
And welcome to Totally Over the Spectrum, where we dive into embracing autism through understanding and support.
Hi, and welcome to episode 14, Getting the Most Out of Your Child's IEP.
This is a heavy context subject over here, and it's a lot of information. So we're just going to try and compress it the best we can. And also taking into consideration feedback that we've had from some of our viewers in regards to the acronyms that we use. It was a request to please provide a little bit more details on the acronyms. So we're going to put that into our conversations a lot more because the feedback that we get from our listeners is what we like to incorporate into future episodes.
Yeah, I mean, the whole point of this is to help people. So it's really hard because we know what those acronyms stand for, and it's hard to remember that this is new information for a lot of people.
I agree with you on that one.
So, all right. So today, IEPs, what are IEPs? We'll start with a definition, and then we'll talk about why autistic children need IEPs. Then we'll talk about how you get one.
Okay.
What goes into one, and once you have one, what you do with it, and then how it carries from primary school to secondary school and beyond. So let's start with the definition. What is an IEP?
Well, an IEP is an individualized education plan, and it is a legal document which is set out in the Education Act. So people need to be aware that when an IEP is put into place, there's accountability piece to this. So take the time to understand what is going to be put into the IEP, the requests that you're going to put forward, and the accountability piece is there for you as the parents to make sure that your child is getting the best possible avenues out of the education system.
I found the definition on the Government of Ontario website.
Okay.
Because I like the.
I know. Yeah. I was giving you the synopsis, the cold notes of it, and you can go for that.
This is not a long definition. It's okay. An individualized education plan. It's a written plan, so it is actually written up. That describes special education programs, accommodations, and services that a school board will provide for a student. And they're based on a thorough assessment of the student's strengths, needs, and ability to learn and to demonstrate learning. Right? So this is a whole guide on how your child learns.
Yeah, and it also will include how your child's progress is going to be measured and how it will be received and reviewed. And this document is a live document. So people don't think that just because it's been written up and you've signed off on it, it cannot be updated or reviewed when necessary.
And when necessary is when you want to. Like, you have a lot of input into this as a parent.
Yes, you do. And for your higher functioning kids who are 16 years of age and older, I would certainly encourage you to get the input from them in creating this education plan.
Yeah, that's interesting because Alex was actually, he's level 1, my oldest son, Alex, level 1, and so lower support needs. And when he went to high school at 14, he was included in all the IEP meetings.
And it I think is the best way to approach to do that with your level 1, your high learners, because they're the ones that know their learning style best. And getting that feedback from them to incorporate it into an IEP, I believe, is a win-win situation and builds the best possible success.
Right. So I think the important thing to think about here is that it is for any child who is autistic, and not just your level 3, not your really high support needs. It's for any kids with a diagnosis.
Yes, and it is any exceptionality. It's not just for kids with autism. So, but because the type of podcast that we're doing, we're going to stick with the genre of autism and how to get the most out of your IEP based on that.
Right. So why would an autistic child need an IEP?
Well, let's just break it down. So, in autism spectrum disorder, it is a spectrum. So, therefore, there is going to be an array of avenues in which people learn, right? And no one style is going to fit that person. So, we've got to take that into consideration and adjust their learning to that. So, for your level ones, it's having mostly, I would say, accommodations made to the curriculum in order for them to be successful in their learning. When you get down to your level 3, you're not going to be following the Ontario curriculum. You're going to be following an alternative curriculum, which will incorporate a lot of other aspects of learning, which we'll discuss a little bit later.
Okay, so I have that an IEP usually happens for one of two reasons. And the first reason is that an IEP has to be developed for every student who has been identified as an exceptional pupil. And that exceptional pupil is identified by the Identification, Placement, and Review Committee, the IPRC. And if you're on Ontario, you are going to hear that come up over and over again. And Identification, Placement, and Review Committee, just fancy. And we will talk about the IPRC in a little bit. So that first reason is that, you have an exceptional pupil is a student who has behavioral, communicational, intellectual, physical, or multiple exceptionalities that require them to have a special education program or service.
So they will fit under one of the 5 categories in the DM5. So the review committee is a formal committee that must follow a formal process and is governed by provincial education laws. So this is not like your SRT groups, which is your school resource team, which is a team of educators that come together to review students at risk and discuss strategies that would be best suited for them. Now, once the SR team, the school resource team, get together and they identify a student at risk, they're the ones that usually suggest that this student or this child be presented at an IPRC in order to see if they are to be diagnosed as have an exceptionality and to which program is best suited for them. Now, the IPRC process also reviews formal diagnosis in order to move them forward to getting an IEP.
So I know that sounds like a lot. It's like we were talking SRT and IPRC, and it gets very confusing. And it's sort of just like a school red tape system that needs to go through. It's just sort of checks and balances that, and we'll go into it in a little more detail. I just wanted to say that the second reason that you could get an IEP or develop for a student who has not been identified at an IPRC meeting as exceptional, but the board deems to require special education programs or services to attend school, achieve curriculum expectations, or demonstrate learning, right? Because an IEP is really there to help ensure that every student receives the necessary support to achieve success in their learning.
Yes, and you do not need a formal diagnosis to have an IEP. So that is the other aspect of it. Having a formal diagnosis definitely carries a lot more weight to it, but you do not require it. So special accommodations, programming is far more effective when you have a formal diagnosis, because then you can really tailor make that IEP for that student, but you do not require one.
But it also, having a formal diagnosis also really helps staff and the higher up the educational food chain you go, their kids are just pieces of paper. They're numbers, right? Like, they don't know these kids on a personal level. So unless they have a piece of paper in front of them to tell them exactly what's going on, it's like your teacher has to fight for it. Your special education resource teacher has to fight for it. And there are limited resources available to the schools in order to help support the kids, yes. Right? So We do talk about getting a diagnosis in one of our earlier videos. Now I can't remember which one it was. And it is just really, really helpful, right?
It is, because as an educator, when I review a document like a student, an OSR, Ontario Student Record, I am able to then go, oh, okay, I see this is the student's areas of strength. These are the student's areas of need. How do I bridge that learning?
Did you say OSR?
Yes.
Which is what?
Ontario.
I'm going to have to call it out when I hear it, because
Ontario Student Record. So that carries with a student throughout, from kindergarten right the way up onto grade 12.
Yeah, that's really just the child's school record, right? It's their file, basically.
It is their file. Yeah, it carries everything that needs to that pertains to that particular student. So when we access that and we have a final formal diagnosis in them, it makes certainly my job easier to be able to bridge the learning gaps between the areas of strengths and the areas of needs.
So I just looked it up. Episode 6, the autism diagnosis. We go over there exactly the importance of getting a diagnosis.
Yes.
So how do you get an IEP? We talked about it a little bit. So if there's an official autism diagnosis, to me, it happens fairly seamlessly, like in my experience, that you have a formal diagnosis. So there's going to automatically be an IPRC meeting.
Yes. And an IPRC meeting will be a minimum of 3 members, and one of those members have to be the principal of the school. They review the findings. They will discuss, what is the best strategy or best form of learning for your child, and put those recommendations into writing and present them to you.
And that's not just based on a diagnosis. There are usually other tests that are performed by the teacher and by the resource teacher to see your child's areas of needs and their strengths.
Yes.
Right. So they do a lot of information gathering before they go to the IPRC meeting, and then the IPRC meeting, they can consider a formal educational assessment.
Yes, they can.
They can consider health or psychological assessments, right, which is conducted by a qualified practitioner if they feel that an assessment is required to make a correct identification or placement decision. They interview the student, or they can interview the student. I never had them do that. To me, the IPRC meeting was literally 5 minutes.
Yeah, and that is supported by the fact that you have a formal diagnosis.
Right. So everything was seamless for me because I had all of that documentation in place before we went. And I know not all parents have that experience. Sometimes they go in and they're fighting to get things. And I just didn't happen to have that experience. Mine was like, I showed up. And they always ask you if you want to go or if you don't want to go. And you sign a little waiver saying, I don't want to go. And I went once and it was literally, oh, hi, how are you? Okay, is everyone in agreement? Yes, they are. Okay, yeah, sign off, bye. It was that quick.
Yeah. So when you don't have a formal diagnosis, we as educators are not healthcare professionals. And therefore we cannot say, we believe your child has this. What we can suggest to you is say, this is what we've noticed about your child, and therefore it is what we believe will be in your child's best learning interest is to be placed into this group of type of learners or this type of program or have this type of support in place in order for your child to be able to learn successfully and demonstrate their learning skills to us. So once again, so we can never turn to you and say, hey, I think your child has autism, or I think your child has ADHD, or, FAS, or any one of those, right?
What's FAS?
So FAS is fetal alcohol syndrome.
ADHD?
And ADHD is attention deficit disorder. So we cannot, we cannot state that because we are not medical professionals. But through years of experience and, we're able to say, this is what we notice, and we can make suggestions on how to help bridge that learning.
I think it's important for people to know too that parents can request an IPRC meeting if the school doesn't set one up.
Yes, yeah, you can absolutely. You can absolutely also request an SRT, evaluation to be done, right? A school resource team to, you know, do an assessment for your child and gather that information and present it to you, and then move forward to an IPRC meeting. These are, I don't want parents to feel that you need to be intimidated by the process. It is not. It's like you said, it's just a process and a formal process that is required by law for the schools to govern and by to give your child the best learning opportunity.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot because all of these acronyms always sound like a lot. And if you are newly dealing with an autism diagnosis to begin with, you've already just been bombarded with so much information. And now the school system is another layer of that. And it feels so overwhelming. The IPRC meeting to me wasn't that big a deal, but I do understand. Like I have read other people's comments and stories about how it was a nightmare for them trying to get the things that they needed in place for their child. So just because I had an easy experience doesn't mean everyone is going to. So I think this particular topic was really important to sort of give everyone as much information as they can in a digestible and easy to understand format.
Yeah.
The creation, so the IPRC meeting just identifies the child, but it doesn't create the IEP. The IEP is created with the special education resource teacher, the teacher, and the child's parents.
Yes. So it is a trifactor of, of layers that you have to create this, because it is a diverse document and it is tailor-made to your child. So we need the special, the certs. We need the special education teacher. We need the parents. But out of all three of them, the parents are the crucial factor to a really good IEP because you know your kids the best.
And I think there are a lot of parents out there who rely heavily on the special education resource teacher and the teacher. And once they get their IEP and it's in place, they sort of forget about it, right? It just continues on. So let's talk a little bit about what actually goes into an IEP.
Now, where there's different levels in which an IEP is presented to a student. For instance, Alex, being a level 1 learner, did not require an alternative curriculum or a modified curriculum. He just required accommodations to a curriculum. So that is the most simplest IEP that you can get.
Okay, so let's back up for a second. So you said a lot of things in that one sentence that people probably don't know what all those pieces mean. So the first thing you said was an alternative curriculum. So Ontario has a set curriculum for all students to follow.
That is correct.
An alternative curriculum is exactly that. It is a different curriculum.
Yes.
So Peter, my youngest, who is level 3, had an alternative curriculum, and it was called the Carolina curriculum. And it's actually amazing curriculum. I really enjoyed it. And I had a very, very good special education resource teacher who worked really closely with me to set that up and implement that for him. And it's just, I don't know how to describe what that curriculum is and how it's different. The Ontario curriculum is set for the average student.
Yes, it is set based on academics, right? Academics achievement. So as for Alex, he just required some accommodations, whether it was to say that he had a longer time to write a final exam, or he was allowed a memory aid in order to complete an exam, or he was allowed an alternative setting to write an exam. Those are accommodations, but his curriculum did not change. He was still working on the curriculum just like any other student.
Yeah, it was exactly the same as everyone else's. So Explain what the alternative curriculum looks like.
So an alternative curriculum is going to have functional academics. So it's not going to have academics based on the Ontario curriculum. It is going to be functional academics that is going to be at the level of your child's, abilities.
Right. So Peter's in grade 1. He's not learning spelling the way the other kids are. He might still be learning the alphabet, for example.
That is right. So the alternative curriculum, so Peter being now in grade 12, his curriculum is still based on the Carolina curriculum, which is a grade 1 learner. So it's a completely different curriculum. We're going to also incorporate functional communication, which is not part of the Ontario curriculum, life skills. We're going to do social and emotional communication, and your fine motor and gross motor skills. Those are the categories in which would be, for a level 3 learner, which we would be accessing an alternative curriculum to.
So that's academic, functional, and social.
Yes.
Okay. What was the third thing we talked about? Modified. So what does modified look like? How does that compare to accommodations, which are just tools you have in place to learn the Ontario curriculum? You have alternative, which is a completely different curriculum, which is set up tailored to that child's specific level of learning. What is modified?
So modified curriculum would be based on the student's cognitive abilities, right? So yes, we are in grade 8. There are certain aspects of the curriculum that we are, say, your child's areas of strength is math and numbers, and therefore they're able to, access the Ontario curriculum, and at a satisfactory level, on par with everybody else, meeting the provincial standards. An accommodation is a modified curriculum then is going to say, okay, but this student's, language skills are not as great. So we're going to modify that curriculum in order to, we're not going to have them write possible, final exams. We're going to have them an alternative way to present their learning. Right.
Right. So their language skills might not be at that grade 8 level. They might be at a grade 3 level, grade 4 level.
Yes.
So we're modifying the curriculum to meet them at their level.
At their level. That's all we're doing. So, and, also they all overlap, right? Depending at the stage of your child. So accommodations can overlap modifications that can overlap an alternative. So they are designed to kind of ebb and flow with each other in order to meet your child's needs. Really play to their strengths and then bridge the gaps between the strengths and their needs.
The other part of what goes into an IEP are goals. So we have annual goals and we have measurable short-term objectives. Can we talk a little bit about that, what that might look like?
Okay, so to me, when I look at, depending upon as your child is coming into, I work specifically, or I thoroughly enjoy working in life skills, right? So that's my happy place to be in. And so when a child is emerging into a life skills program, whether it be grade 3 or grade 4, I go, okay, I have the student from grade 3 or 4 right up until grade 8, right? So my goal is grade 8, preparing them to go into high school. What is the end goal? What is the level of functioning right now? And what do I need to do to lay the foundations in order to have that student achieve those goals by grade 8, right? And I want parents to go, well, that's a lot. And why are you planning 4 years in advance? Because your child is going to take 3 to 4 times longer to develop those skills. And therefore, the learning has to be then really scaled back and scaffolded in order for me to obtain those goals. So my end goal is grade 8, but my skills are going to start right from the basis, and I'm going to build strong foundations in order to achieve those learning goals by grade 8.
Yeah.
That's just me.
I know. And hey, let me tell you, it works.
Yeah.
Your plan of attack, I have seen the benefits. My child has experienced those benefits. So thank you.
The best part about this is that you're going to push them just to that edge of their boundaries of learning, and just like an elastic band, you're just going to extend them enough where they're uncomfortable with the new type of learning, but it is not overwhelming. As soon as it gets to the point of overwhelming and difficult, where I start to see regression, then I know I've pushed too far, and then I dial it back again. So, and each day is going to be different. And my best laid plans for a day of going, oh, I'm going to get this done, I'm going to introduce this. And in walks my student, and guess what? The bowl of cereal spilt everywhere. They're not completely dysregulated. Those plans get packed up very nicely and put aside, and I focus on what I need to accomplish for that day. And, I take advantage of what that is going to offer me and what am I going to teach. It doesn't have to be academics.
Right. You might be focused on emotional regulation that day.
Absolutely. And they all tie into each other. So it's never a waste of learning, right? It's never a waste. So I take the opportunity to work on emotional regulations. How is that going to tie in along the way down the line by grade 8? Hey, they're going into grade 8. They're going to be going into high school. They're going to be going into that next layer of learning. If they're able to, learn their emotional regulation skills by grade 8, huge. Because now they're going to enter that next level of learning where that emotional regulation is really going to be pushed as we develop their skills in order to go into the community.
And transitioning, we know, can be extremely difficult. So, and grade 8 to grade 9 is a huge transition. So I like that you've talked about this, because how that ties in with IEPs is that even though the IEP has set out your achievement criteria and short-term goals and some long-term goals, those short-term goals are not going to be met every single day, even though they're written in the IEP. Yes, this is a legal document. Yes, we're going to be working on this part of language and this part of numeracy and this part of communication. Some days we're not working on those things because the child is not able to do that.
Yeah. And don't look at it as like, oh my God, my child is never going to learn this, or we're not going to achieve this. You're not going to achieve it today. But you will achieve those, right? Keep their goals realistic. That is absolutely important. Yeah, keeping those goals realistic, but also to the point where you can push for that next layer of learning and that next layer of emotional development, academic development. And it will get there. It's just that the process is a lot slower. Be patient.
IEPs also have achievement criteria, right? And they have assessment dates and the results of those assessments written into that IEP. So that always moves forward with them.
Absolutely, they are. And people often go, well, how did you assess my child? Okay, so there are different forms of and how we're doing an assessment. Is it through observation? Is it through, evidence of work given to them, and then therefore they are reviewed? Are they a one-on-one assessment? Are they a class assessment? Are they, so are they doing a task analysis? So there are different forms in which we can measure them, and your educator is going to be the one that you need to have a really good rapport with in order to say, when you say to my child test, their anxiety goes through the roof, right? So let's kind of change our language and just say to them, instead of, oh, I've got a test for you today, just say, we're going to review the unit we just did. A review does not sound as intimidating as a test. So the anxiety level of that student is going to go from here to here because it's a review, right? You're just phasing it in a different way. You can set the parameters in which you're going to review it the same way you're going to set how you're going to do the test, right? Your student's not going to know the difference. The difference is that they're going to be able to effectively demonstrate their learning to you in a manner that you can record it and be able to show and present that information to, you as a parent.
Right. So it is really, really important for parents to take the time to collaborate with the school and to hold them accountable.
Yes, you need to be able to do that too. And I'm going to let you speak on that, the accountability piece and how important it is for you.
I found primary school to be really easy. It was really easy to work with teachers. It was really easy to work with EAs in most aspect of things for both my kids. And I found that high school was a bit different. So for my oldest son, Alex, level 1 in high school, he no longer had EA support as soon as he went to high school, gone. And I was like, that's okay. Like, let's see how that goes. And they had an amazing resource teacher that worked with me on IEPs and that sort of thing. But I found that Alex was mostly able to keep up with the curriculum, even in high school, with some accommodations, right? So he got to write his exams in a quiet room like the library, and he got sort of unlimited time to write those exams, which in the early days was really, really important for him. Because he could do it, he just couldn't do it in an hour, right? And he wasn't the only one. He wasn't the only one in the library, right? There were a bunch of kids in the library doing the same thing. But mostly he's academically fairly strong, right? He just needs prompting to get things done, which was my job mostly. When he came home, hey, do you have any homework? Hey, let's work on that now. Well, it's not due for another week. Yeah, but let's just get it done early, right?
Yeah.
Let's do that. So just that kind of thing to help Alex. But Peter in high school, being in life skills, it was a hard transition to go from grade 8 to grade 9. And we lost a lot of skills. There was a lot of regression. And it ended up being that Peter was not in the correct classroom in that life skills environment, because they did have different classrooms set up in different ways because the kids were all at different levels.
Yeah. So I'm just going to take an opportunity to speak to that piece over there. So when you are in elementary and life skills program, which is now going to be called CPP,
which is the Community Pathways Program.
And it is an integrated class, right? Unlike high school, where they do have individualized cohorts where learners of the same type needing the same, require the same needs or accommodations are grouped together. Where you're in elementary, we do not have that. We have an integrated system. So it's students from as young as grade 3 all the way up to grade 8 in the same classroom. But each one of their programs are tailor-made for them. They overlap in most areas because we find that we try and group them with, more of the higher functioning in one type of CPP program and the lower functioning in another CPP program.
Just before anyone gets upset, that has been the terminology for a really long time in school.
Yes,
high functioning, low functioning. And I know that we are moving away and we're talking about support needs. So we're not saying, so high functioning, it really is an outdated term, but it's really hard to change your language on a dime. So high functioning is really kids with lower support needs.
Yes, lower support needs and accessing more of the functional academics. Not so much as of the other areas. So your kids that require the fine motor or the gross motor development, whether they require, they're medically fragile, and cognitively and socially, right? So your kids that are more social and integrated, that are partially integrated into mainstream, are generally, we try to place them into that grouping in order to develop those social skills even more. Where, the kids that are not so, into needing the social aspect of it, are perfectly happy just with each other and having, and like, this is life. I don't need somebody coming over and talking to me and get all day. No, no, no. I'm perfectly happy, and I'm far more content being in this environment in which I can engage in my learning far more effectively.
So in high school, it looks a little bit different,
Yes, it
and
does.
but the IEP was it's a little bit different in high school. So it does carry over, and we'll talk about carryover in a little bit. The next thing I really want to talk about is, so you've gone through the process, you have your IEP, you've got it all set up. Now what?
So this is where the hard work really does come in for the educator, right? This is when the real learning starts to take place, is now how am I going to introduce what your goals, these learning goals are? How are we going to do it? How am I going to scaffold that learning? What materials am I going to use? What environment am I going to use? There are so many contributing factors that you have to take into to play every single day. And as a good educator, you have to learn to pivot that education on a moment's notice, right? You can go from 100 to 0 like in a snap of your hand, right? It's done, right? So
Not everyone has a great educator. That's just a fact. So as a parent, you have your IEP, you've worked hard, you've got this IEP in place, and you have all of these goals, and you might still need to check in with your educator to make sure that they are working to achieve those goals. So I'm sorry to say that as a parent, if you're lucky, you don't have to check in as much, but you might have to check in and say, "Hey, I would like work samples sent home every week showing me what my child has been working on," because you're going to have to hold the school accountable to make sure that they are implementing that IEP.
yeah. And if you find that there are huge gaps in your child's learning, don't be afraid to ask for a meeting. Don't be afraid to say, hey, I'd like to have a meeting with the special education teacher and say, I'm finding that there's been some learning gaps, or vice versa. Don't be defensive when your educator reaches out to you and say, hey, we have noticed certain gaps now starting to appear since we have introduced this, or this new skill. Can we have a discussion about it? Be open, because this is a fluid document. It's going to change constantly. And you might take one step back in order to take 3 steps forward. So don't look at it as negatively, right? It's just readjusting certain aspects of their learning in order to scaffold it appropriately to achieve that next platform of success.
We talk a lot about working together with the school in episode 3, Autism and Education, but it is so, so important for you to have open communication with your teacher and to have open communication with the special education resource teacher, because those are your group. Those are the people you're going to need to connect with in order to make sure that your child is successful.
I couldn't agree more. It makes my job far more, I can get more out of my student when we have open communication and say, you know, in our program, we do have a communication book that goes back and forth. Just a quick note to say, we didn't have a great night's sleep, or we woke up and very early this morning, right? So these are all contributing factors. So I know as an educator, it's like, oh, we didn't have a great night's sleep, or we woke up really early. The academics that I had planned for the introduction, that I had planned for the afternoon, is not going to be a great idea because they're going to be too tired in order for me to introduce something new to them. So I'm going to take that piece out. I'm going to put it in the morning, and I'm going to lessen the load in the afternoon so that we have a successful day, both in academic learning and emotional regulation. So,
And to me, what you're saying is you're really good at your job and you're willing to do that. And I know that not everyone is going to have that experience.
No, not everybody has that experience, but having that open communication really builds towards that experience.
I agree. There are also input forms for the IEP that go home twice a year. So twice a year, you will get a form that comes home that says, "Hey, is there anything as a parent you would like to see changed on the IEP?"
Yeah. So why twice a year? Term 1, term 2. And in both term 1 and term 2, you will get progress reports halfway to say, hey, this is where we're going. This is where we're good at. We have superstarred and we have achieved all of our learning goals of this. So we're just going to modify it. And, for the second half of our term, and just see if we can increase that learning just a little bit more. Or on the flip side, say, yeah, we haven't quite got there yet. So we've got a little bit more time and hopefully we can achieve that.
Yeah. Take your time, review it when it comes home. Don't just sign it, hand it back, right? Take your time, read it, review it, reach out to the teacher, reach out to the resource teacher if you need to, and be a part of that team. Because that is how your child is actually going to be successful.
I couldn't agree more with you. Yeah. All right. What's next on your hit list?
So we talked a little bit about this, and I'm sorry if we've jumped around a little bit. It's just there's so much information, and we get excited about it and want to talk about all of it all at once. Does the IEP go to high school? Yes, we've discussed that. So yes, your IEP goes to high school, but high school looks different. It is a different system. It is a different layout. And for me, there is much less communication between school and home once your child goes to high school.
Yes, it is. There is far less communication, and the approach that the high schools take, I'm not going to say it's far less communication. The communication is now condensed into before, where in elementary we've kind of held your hand along the way, and built those bridges and said, okay, and we're stretching not just the students' growth, but we have to now stretch the parents' growth and say, they're going to be just fine. They've got the skills, they have the knowledge. They're going to be fine. They're ready for high school. And Peter was so ready for high school in grade 8. Like come, December, he was like, if I could check out of here, I certainly would. He was ready for high school. So you may not have been ready for high school.
I was not ready for high school. I wasn't.
But he was so ready for high school.
And high school for me was I dropped him off, and because Peter is non-speaking, it's not like I could say, oh, how was your day? And he's going to answer me. So I was really, really relying on that daily communication book that came home to tell me how things were. And depending on which class they were in high school, they're trying to increase these kids' independence.
Yes.
Right? And I'm like, sure, that's great, but can I know what happened today? Like, I'd like to know what happened. I can't give you input. I need to know. Like, I'm not a control freak. I just want some information. I'm autistic. Of course I want the information, right? So it was really hard for me to send him off and just hope for the best. And some days they were not the best.
Yeah. I think the crucial piece is that if things it was not a really good day, you will always hear about it, right? So to me, I'm an optimist view, because that's who I am, is that all is good unless you hear all is not good.
Sure, all is good, but are we moving forward, right? Like, I'm not getting work sent home. I don't know if he's just sitting there all day or if he's actually working all day. There's a certain element of faith or trust that I have to put in to the school and to the educators to say, yes, we're moving forward. And for the most part, sure, until, there's a teacher that comes up that isn't actually doing their job, which I did come across, and had to do a whole lot of shuffling. But in the meantime, there's regression of Peter's skills, right? So high school's not the happiest place for me.
No, because I think high school is also promoting for that, like you said, that level of independence. And our level 1 learners or our level 2, we're trying to develop skills in order for them to be able to get a job in the community or live supported in the community, right? So we're really pushing for that big amount of growth. Even those students, when they do go to high school, are allowed to be there until the age of 21. It's still, and people go like, 21, that's long. No, it takes you all of that time in order to get to that level of independence. So therefore, that extension of age is there for a reason.
And not all the kids have to stay.
No, absolutely not.
But it is really nice that they can if they
They can
need
if
to.
they do. Absolutely.
So your IEP does go to high school, and my suggestion to parents, as a parent, is to still make sure that you are on top of it, and to make sure that you hold your educators accountable and make sure that they are doing their job, because you're not getting as much feedback from them as you're used to getting. So don't just sit back and say, well, okay, I'll just let them, reach out if you're wondering. You can still ask for examples of their work to see where they're at.
And you don't have to wait till midterms, right? You don't have to wait till that midterm point and where you get, an update on their learning. You can certainly reach out. And at first, you're going to want to do that a little bit more to more so to ease your anxiety versus your child's anxiety. Because all of a sudden, they're being treated like a big kid. And trust me, Peter loved it. Okay. He loved going for high school visits, and he was like, "Oh yes, I have arrived." So
yeah, I know he enjoyed it. He also pulled 5 fire alarms one day. So it's yes, he enjoyed it, but was he receiving the amount of academic education that he should have been receiving all the time? No, he didn't. So I am not one to go in and say, I want this, I want this, I want this. I'm very good to let a certain amount of time go by to get everyone settled and get accustomed to each other. And then once that time period has happened and everybody's allowed to figure each other out and get into a rhythm, then I will come in and say, hey, I'd just like to know how things are going.
yeah, don't forget, folks, after the summer holidays, there is regression. Okay, there's always regression. So September and part of October is usually for us as educators is recapping everything that we've learned, kind of dusting off the cobwebs on our skills that have been packed away for the summer, and then bringing them back up to speed with a lot of resistance sometimes, because now there's demands and requests that are going to be placed on us. And so we're not liking being pushed those boundaries once again. So generally September and part of October usually takes time for us to bring us back up to speed. So be patient, be kind.
Yeah, I always wait until the first parent-teacher interview, which is about that time.
Yeah.
Right? It gives everybody time to get everything in place and and there's not just one child in these classrooms. There's a whole bunch of kids in these classes, and they all have particular needs, and the teacher is going to try to get everybody set up and in routine, and that's going to take time.
It does take time. It takes a lot of effort. It takes, and depending upon what the supports that are placed into each classroom, sometimes we're stretched very, very thin. And that's a whole different conversation about the education system in Ontario, on that is an entirely different controversial, conversation that we can have another time.
So yes, your IEP goes to high school. Stay on top of it still. Don't just say, yes, they're off in high school, I can just let it go. Still reach out to the teachers, still work on those IEPs together. And Peter's in a really good place right now. He's in the right classroom with the right amount of support, and they are going through his IEP. And we had a great IEP meeting this year, and he's happy and he's doing really well.
And that is, you can't ask for anything better than that.
No.
So now what happens to an IEP from there? It stops. An IEP stops at high school. It does not then carry over to post-secondary education. That is a whole different process, and we can certainly talk about that in another episode. But the importance of having a formal diagnosis is absolutely crucial when you go into post-secondary education.
Right. So my oldest son, Alex, level 1, he has gone off to college, and that IEP didn't automatically transfer. In college or university, you have to self-identify as a student with a disability and provide documented proof of your disability to the accessibility services, which we had to go in and do. And they were lovely. By the
They
way.
are
Were
lovely, but it is,
Your high school IEP will not be enough.
no. it
That
is
will not be enough. And you might even need a new psychoeducational assessment, which you might have to pay for. And that is, can you explain a little bit about what a psychoeducational assessment is?
It is a formal assessment done, and it's quite an intense process, both for a student to go through, right? And it very explicitly describes the areas of strength and areas of needs and what accommodations would be best suited for that person. And that piece, that accommodation piece, those recommendations needs to be written out really, really well in order for a university to be able to then place those recommendations into your learning. So that to me is, your assessment process, no problem. But the results of that and how it's written out and documented is crucial. So make sure that when you do have a formal assessment done and an evaluation done, please make sure that the accommodations that are vital for your child's success are included in those statements.
Yeah. Your school might provide you with a psychoeducational assessment, but once you get to high school, they are less likely to give one of those to you because that student's leaving.
Yes.
Why are they going to spend that money on that student when that student's out the door? And these things cost about maybe $2,500 Canadian.
Yes, and sometimes it does take a while to get one. And some universities, I would say most universities require a psych ed assessment that is no older than 2 years.
Yeah. Alex was allowed to use his from when he was 12. They accepted it.
And Alex also has a formal diagnosis.
That's the thing.
Which is
and that's why they accepted it, because I did check out the private funding for that, like the private places where you can go and have to pay for it yourself, and they ranged anywhere from $1,500 to $4,000. So yeah, that's a lot. So I was very, very thankful that his old assessment from when he was 12 plus his official diagnosis were enough.
Yes. So that is, so accommodations will be provided as long as your psych ed report specifically says what those accommodations are.
Yes. And even if you don't think you're going to use the accommodations, make sure they are written down, please, because just in case you might need them.
Yes. Cover them all. Cover
That's right.
all
take them all. Take all of them. If you don't need it, you
in.
don't need it, but take them all.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So pretty much that is, that is the whole process. You go from your special resource team, who then put you towards your IPRC, which is your the review committee.
Identification Placement Review Committee.
And which then creates your IEP, which is your Individualized Education Plan. And that is pretty much the whole process when you're in the school system. Yeah. If I am going to leave one thought for parents to do, I specifically wrote this down, and I say, think forward and ask yourself, what can my child do? Can they work in the future? And if so, what type of work? And if your answer is yes, those skills need to be taught starting at the age of 13. And before you can start teaching the foundations of those skills, it is crucial for them to start the foundations of learning the employment skills between the age of 6 and 12. So when I say plan as far forward as you possibly can, and then dial it right the way back to where they are right now and start building those skills, and it will pay off. I promise you, it will pay off.
And that requires you to focus on what your child's strengths are, because you might not see a possible employment opportunity based on those strengths right away, but those are the strengths. Those are the things that might lead to a job.
Yes. Temple Grandin believes that too.
Absolutely.
Okay. which leads us into then, do autistic people need accommodations?
Yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about accommodations, but I think that deserves its own full podcast on that.
Yeah. So for our next podcast, I think we should discuss autistic accommodations.
And that's not just for children or high school. Like, that's also, I need accommodations as an adult. So I'd like to talk about that too.
Okay. And until the next time, have a great day.
We'll see you then. Thanks for tuning in. If you know someone who might find this episode helpful, feel free to share. Also, check out our website and socials linked in the description.